Some things I noticed, Matthew, when you were telling the story, you use scenes very well, you use location very well. It's almost like my brain starts to do the work for you. You speed up at times, you slow down at times. But I'm sure there's a lot more to it in the strategy and the structure. Could you tell us, what you were thinking about when you wrote it, what you're trying to achieve, like what are the kind of the secrets that make it so effective?
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't write anything down. I'm a novelist, so I believe in writing a lot. I've already written this morning, but I don't write anything down that I say on stage. I've never written anything down that I've ever spoken aloud. That's just the way my brain works. So I work by speaking it and remembering it and then recording it and then playing it back to myself in the position of being an audience to decide what's boring and what's not. In terms of the strategy of the story, the first thing I always start with is the end. You have to know where your landing spot is. You have to have something to say. And if you don't know what your end is, you don't have something to say. You're just sort of talking about stuff that happened to you. So I knew the end of my story was that spoon became my most valuable teaching tool, and I could sort of land that anywhere I wanted. Had the pandemic not happened, I could have placed that valuable teaching tool in a different place, but the pandemic comes and it's the first year I actually put the spoon on my colleagues. Sometimes teachers are wearing it to make them feel better. So that was just an unfortunate but convenient place to end the story because that's where the spoon became most valuable to me. But essentially I'm trying to say, weirdly, a spoon is my most valuable teaching tool. It changes children's lives every day. That's what I'm essentially trying to tell you. The beginning of the story has to be the opposite of that. That's how we reflect change over time. That is what a story is. It's how we change in terms of what we think, feel, who we are as a person. And so if at the end of my story, the spoon is my most valuable teaching tool, at the beginning of the story, it must be an ordinary spoon. And if you remember all the way back at the beginning of the story, Jamie emerges from that leaf pile and I say, it's a spoon. It's an ordinary kitchen spoon. I literally say those words because I want to cement the idea that this is not something special, because I know as a storyteller, I'm going to make it special over time, right? So beginning and ending stories in places of opposition, understanding what you're trying to say, and then asking yourself sort of what's the opposite of that, because that creates automatic change. That's really important. Most people start stories in the wrong place, and they often don't end stories in places of meaning. They often just talk about stuff that happened to them. So if you're thinking that way, that alone will be enormous for you. And then I do things like I start stories as close to the end as possible, which is really important. I could have started that story with something like, so I go to school, I work at, a school in Connecticut. I'm a 5th grade teacher. I got 22 kids in my class. Like, you can feel that's all terrible and boring, but that's how most people start stories. They feel like they have to give you the lay of the land. They have to teach you about their lives before they tell you a story. My story starts the moment a spoon appears. I'm standing on the playground behind my school, leaf pile, and spoon. That's as close as I can get to the end. Everything else you need to learn about me being a teacher and teaching 5th grade and all these things, I can tell you that after the story has started. But I got to get the story started or I'm going to lose my audience immediately. I have to grab your attention. And then you were right that I start with location and I start with action. I always start with location because it does leverage the images in your brain. If you pay attention closely, I said the playground behind my school. And I knew you could see it. You can't see mine, but I'm not interested in you seeing mine. I'm interested in seeing the playground that you can imagine most clearly. So you saw your childhood playground, the playground for kids that you have, a playground you see on television, whatever it is. I just want you to grab the one that you can see most clear. And the classroom too. You know that I have a stage in my classroom. I would never say that in that story. That would just be a terrible distraction. All I said was classroom. And I allowed you to take the classroom that's already in your brain and put it into my story. And as long as the particulars of the classroom are irrelevant to the story, which they almost always are, I want you to use the one that you can already see. And so when people tell me, like, your story is like a movie in my mind, how do you get me to see it so clearly? I tell them I don't describe anything. I try to use as few adjectives as possible. I am simply leveraging the images that already exist in your brain, and I use those to create my story. And you think I'm creating a classroom in your mind, but really you've already created it for me. I am just placing action, dialogue, thoughts, and feelings into that space that you already have offered to me. So not describing things is actually really helpful in a story, because no one has ever listened to a story and thought at the end of it, boy, I wish they had described more things. I wish I knew the color of that girl's hair, or I wonder what color his car was. Like, these are not things people care about, and yet for some reason, storytellers oftentimes get obsessed with these things, and that's what kills their stories.